Gemini, a truth buried in your childhood is ready to be revealed this week. Beneath your radiant curiosity and lightning quick mind lies a question you've been unknowingly circling your entire life. Why do you so often feel like you're performing, even in the most intimate of spaces? Why does the need to be agreeable, adaptable, and entertaining often outweigh your own emotional needs? And most importantly, why is there a quiet ache behind the smiles you offer the world? This week, the cosmos invites you to return, not forward, but inward. Something ancient within you is stirring. A memory, a truth, a buried moment from your early years when you first learned that to be loved, you had to become someone else. This moment has quietly written the script for many of your relationships and self-perceptions ever since. But now, that script is being rewritten. Through this video, we'll gently uncover that truth, not to relive the pain, but to finally bring it into the light, where healing and transformation can begin. Your inner child has waited long enough to be acknowledged. And now, the stars align to help you remember what was once forgotten, not as a punishment, but as your path to freedom. If this resonates even slightly, I invite you to stay with me. Like, share, and subscribe, not for the algorithm, but because this message may help others remember their truth too. You're not alone in this, Gemini. Let's walk this path home together. Gate 1. The moment you learned it wasn't safe to be yourself. Gemini, for all your wit, adaptability, and eloquence, there was a moment, long ago, when the air in the room changed, and you knew deep in your child heart that something invisible had shifted. Perhaps you don't remember the exact words or expressions. Maybe it wasn't a dramatic event, but a subtle, repeated silence. A sigh when you spoke your truth. A disapproving glance when you asked too many questions. A punishment cloaked in "you should know better." Whatever the form, the result was the same. You learned it wasn't entirely safe to be yourself. For most Geminis, the wound doesn't come from overt rejection, but from the distortion of light. You shine so brightly as a child, curious, expressive, delighting in the world, and somewhere along the way, that light was too much for someone. It threatened their control, their routine, their silence, and in their discomfort, they asked you, without saying a word, to dim your brilliance. Maybe your playfulness was mistaken for recklessness. Maybe your opinions, though insightful, were seen as too much or disruptive. Maybe you simply asked a question that the adults in the room couldn't emotionally handle, so they ignored it, or you, and in that fragile moment of confusion, you made an unconscious vow. To stay safe, I must become what others want me to be. I must adapt. I must be likable. I must not take up too much space. And oh, Gemini, how masterfully you did. You became the chameleon. You learned to read every room, mirror every emotion, shift shape to meet expectations. You made people laugh. You became the peacekeeper in chaos. You learned how to anticipate everyone's needs before they asked. But no one asked how you were doing. This is where the split began, between who you are and who you thought you had to become. On one side, the radiant, raw, inquisitive soul that came into this world with fire and wonder. On the other, the polished version of you that learned to entertain, soothe, and perform to earn love. This week, the planetary alignments are stirring that sleeping memory. It may come in dreams, in unexpected tears, in a moment of deja vu during a conversation with someone who reminds you of the past. You might feel unusually tender or irritable. These aren't random emotional swings. They're invitations. They're the voice of your inner child rising from the depth, asking to be remembered. Let's pause here and recognize something. This wound isn't your fault. It's a byproduct of growing up in a world where adults often couldn't hold the emotional complexity of a curious, expressive, deeply feeling child. Your parents or caretakers weren't monsters. Most likely, they were wounded children in adult bodies, repeating the patterns they didn't have the tools to break. But now you have the tools. Now you have the awareness. That makes all the difference. Real healing begins when we give ourselves the safety we were once denied. So, ask yourself gently, when did you first feel like you had to become easier for others? What parts of yourself did you tuck away because they didn't receive the approval you needed? What emotion did you stop showing? Anger, grief, confusion, even joy, because it was misunderstood or judged. One client of mine, a Gemini named Elena, remembered how, as a little girl, she'd write stories and share them with her father. One day he came home tired and snapped, "Why are you always so loud? I need quiet." Elena didn't realize it then, but from that day forward, she stopped writing altogether. She became the quiet, helpful daughter, always present but never expressive. When we unearthed that memory together, the tears came, not from the pain of what happened, but from the grief of all that was silenced. Another, a Gemini man named Theo, remembered being punished at school for talking too much. Over time, he learned to only speak when he was certain it wouldn't cause trouble. He eventually became a brilliant writer, but struggled with intimacy because he feared that if people really heard his thoughts unfiltered, they'd reject him. Gemini, these stories are not unique. They're reflections of a deeper collective wound, the suppression of authenticity for the illusion of safety. But safety that comes from performance is never true safety. It's survival, and you are not here to survive. You are here to thrive. This week, your work is not to fix anything. It's to witness. When the feelings arise, confusion, sadness, anger, breathe with them. Speak to your inner child. You might even say out loud, "I see you. I hear you. I believe you. I'm so sorry you had to change who you were just to be accepted. But you don't have to do that anymore. I've got you now." You'll be amazed at what begins to unfold when you do. A sense of peace, a sudden inspiration, a memory that once felt haunted becoming just a page in your story, no longer your entire narrative. And slowly, the split within you begins to mend. The Gemini soul is born to connect, to communicate, to explore. When you reclaim your voice, not the one shaped by expectation, but the one that rises from the deepest truth, you'll not only feel more whole, you will become magnetic. People will feel drawn to your authenticity, not your performance. You'll stop attracting relationships that drain you and instead begin attracting connections that nourish you, challenge you, and reflect the fullness of your being. Gate 1 is a return to your beginning, to the moment you first lost yourself. But it's also the place where you find yourself again, where your inner child, no longer invisible, becomes your guide, where your words are no longer filtered to keep the peace, but chosen to tell your truth. And this, dear Gemini, is just the beginning. Gate 2, the addiction to approval, how pleasing others became your survival strategy. Gemini, once the seed of self-denial was planted in your childhood, it grew into something deceptively beautiful on the surface. You became agreeable, helpful, adaptable, endlessly attentive to the moods and needs of others. But beneath that external grace lived a growing dependency, an emotional addiction to approval, and not the healthy, mutual kind of recognition we all need, but the kind that made your sense of self fragile, your joy conditional, your choices laced with quiet self-abandonment. Let's be honest. You didn't wake up one day and decide to prioritize everyone else's needs above your own. It happened slowly. It began with praise when you behaved, a smile of approval when you said the right thing, a frown when you contradicted, cried, or complained. Your nervous system, still forming, linked love with performance. The applause became your oxygen. And without even realizing it, you became fluent in the unspoken rules of emotional diplomacy. Gemini, your greatest strength is your awareness. You observe everything. You pick up the unsaid, the shift in tone, the tension behind someone's eyes. But when this gift of perception is hijacked by fear, it becomes hypervigilance. You begin to overthink every sentence, second-guess your instincts, and mold yourself endlessly to preserve harmony. And here's the cost. You vanish from your own life. I want to tell you a story about Mila, a Gemini client of mine in her late 30s. On paper, she had it all: a loving husband, 2 children, a thriving career in media. But she came to me hollowed out. "I don't know who I am anymore," she whispered during our first session. Every decision she made, what to cook, how to dress, when to rest, was unconsciously filtered to the question, what will they think? She had become a master of giving, always anticipating needs, always available, always smiling. But when I asked her when was the last time she allowed herself to disappoint someone in order to honor her truth, she couldn't remember. She cried for almost an hour, not because she was weak, but because she had been strong for too long. This is a Gemini paradox. You are born with two faces not to deceive, but to survive. The outer twin knows how to connect, engage, and uplift. The inner twin watches silently, wondering when it will be safe to come forward. But when the outer face dominates, you become imprisoned in a performance that others applaud, while the real you fades into the wings. And that's what this week is about. Recognizing the moment when your ability to please became compulsive, when being liked became more important than being whole, when approval became your drug of choice, and you mistook attention for affection, validation for value. What makes this so tricky is that the world rewards people like you. You're charming, you're quick-witted, you're a natural storyteller and connector. But very few notice when you're exhausted, when you're smiling through the ache, when you say yes with your voice but no with your soul. You've trained yourself so well that even your closest friends may not realize you're operating from depletion. But Gemini, here's a revelation that changes everything. Pleasing is not the same as loving, and approval is not the same as belonging. True belonging does not require performance. It doesn't demand you be perfect, agreeable, or entertaining. It welcomes your no. It honors your boundaries. It embraces your complexity, your contradictions, your raw, unfiltered truth. Ask yourself, how many relationships in your life are built on your ability to keep things smooth? How many friends come to you because you're easy to be around, not because they actually see you? And when was the last time someone loved you not for what you could give, but simply for who you are, even when you're messy, tired, irritable, or sad? Gemini, the ache you carry isn't because you're doing something wrong. It's because you've done something unnatural for so long, suppressing your needs in order to meet others. This week, you're being asked to withdraw your identity from performance, to stop asking, did I do it right? Do they still like me? Was I too much? And begin asking, does this feel right to me? Am I honoring my truth? What would I choose if I wasn't afraid of disapproval? It will feel terrifying at first. The approval you built your life on is like scaffolding. It's held you up for years. But the structure isn't you. It's a coping mechanism, a mask. And as you remove it, piece by piece, you'll begin to stand on something firmer. Your essence, your integrity, your inner compass. Another Gemini I work with, named Aaron, told me he spent years pursuing degrees, accolades, and social clout just to earn his father's respect. When he finally realized that no amount of achievement would earn the unconditional love he craved, he collapsed, not in defeat, but in relief. He said, I've been playing the role of the golden son. Now I want to find out who I really am. And that's what you're doing now, Gemini. You're not breaking down, you're breaking free. To do this, you must make peace with disappointment. Yes, some people will be unsettled when you stop performing. Some may leave. But hear me. Anyone who walks away from your truth was only ever in love with your mask. Let them go, because what you'll gain is priceless. Real connection, deep intimacy, the ability to be seen and loved as your whole self, not just the parts that fit someone else's fantasy. In Gate 1, you remember the moment you learned to hide. In Gate 2, you reclaim the courage to stop hiding. And it starts with one small act of defiance. Say what you actually feel. Ask for what you truly want. Let someone down, and notice how the world doesn't end. This is the week your soul begins its withdrawal from approval. It won't be easy, but it will be the most honest, liberating path you've ever walked. And on the other side of that withdrawal, you, unmasked, unfiltered, undeniable. Gate 3, reconnecting with your inner voice, the return of the forgotten self. Gemini, now that you've seen the mask for what it is, a deeper question emerges, one that may feel both exhilarating and terrifying. If I am no longer who others need me to be, then who am I? This is where your true journey begins. Not in unraveling the pain of the past, but in rediscovering the voice you silenced long ago. Beneath the layers of compliance, beneath the charm and quick thinking, there exists a quieter, wiser presence. One that doesn't perform. One that doesn't ask for permission. One that has always known the truth of who you are. This is your inner voice. Not the one conditioned by fear or reward, but the one born from your essence. And this week, Gemini begins to speak again. You may hear it in strange ways, through dreams that stir forgotten emotions, through random memories returning like whispers from another life, or in a moment of stillness when you finally stop trying to be on. This voice will not shout. It will not beg for your attention. It will gently knock and wait for you to listen. One of the most painful consequences of people-pleasing is not just the suppression of emotion, but the silencing of instinct. When you spend years tuning into everyone else's needs, opinions, and expectations, your own voice fades into the background. Over time, you lose trust in it. You second-guess what you feel. You overthink what you want. You become split, capable of articulating anything, yet unsure of what you actually believe. But now, the mending begins. You may find yourself drawn to things you used to love as a child, books, music, colors, ideas, that never needed to impress anyone. You may notice a spontaneous craving to express something, a truth you've long buried, an opinion you've been afraid to say, an aspect of yourself you were taught to suppress. This isn't random. It's your essence remembering itself. Let me tell you about Julian, a Gemini in his mid-40s who came to me after a quiet breakdown. Not the kind that ends in collapse, but the kind that begins in awakening. He told me he was tired of living a life that looked good but felt empty. "I'm always talking," he said, "but none of it feels like me." When we traced his story, we found the moment his inner voice had gone quiet. Age 9, after being laughed at for expressing a deep philosophical thought in front of his extended family. He had said, "I wonder if we were all stars before we were people." And they laughed. Not cruelly, just out of discomfort. But that laugh silenced something sacred in him. He grew up learning how to say the right things, the clever things, the socially acceptable things. But deep down, his mind still wandered into the cosmos, still held those sparkling, star-born thoughts. When he finally gave himself permission to speak from that place again, he wept, not out of sadness, but out of reunion. He wasn't broken. He was simply returning to the part of himself he had buried to belong. Gemini, your voice is your compass. Not the one you use to entertain, explain, or smooth over tension, but the one you use when no one's watching. The one that rises in moments of quiet with truth so clear it doesn't need justification. This week, that voice will start to emerge more clearly, and you'll face a crossroads again and again. Do I override it to keep the peace? Or do I honor it, even if it shakes the peace I've carefully maintained? Reclaiming your inner voice doesn't mean becoming loud or confrontational. It means becoming real. It means saying, "Actually, I don't agree," or "This doesn't feel right to me," or simply, "I need space." It means making room for you at the center of your own life, not just as a narrator, but as the author. You may fear that honoring your truth will make you seem selfish. But Gemini, here's the sacred paradox. The more true you are to yourself, the more your connections deepen. When people experience your authenticity, they feel safe to be authentic, too. And that's how real intimacy is born, not through perfection, but through presence. The most powerful relationships are not those where conflict is avoided, but those where both people feel safe enough to bring their full selves to the table, without the masks, without the fear of being too much. And here's something important. As you reconnect with your voice, you may grieve. You may grieve the years you lost to silence, the decisions you made that weren't really yours, the times you ignored your gut because someone else's comfort felt more important than your truth. Let that grief come. Let it move through you like a tide washing over an old shoreline, because behind it is something even greater. Joy. The joy of speaking freely. The joy of choosing without apology. The joy of waking up and asking, "What I want today?" and letting that answer be enough. Gemini, you spent much of your life as a mirror, reflecting, adapting, making others feel seen. But now, it's time to look into the mirror yourself, not to adjust what you see, but to finally recognize it. This is who I am, not what they needed, not what they approved, not what they rewarded. Just me, and that, dear Gemini, is more than enough. In Gate 3, you stop performing and start listening. You begin to peel back the layers that should and ought to, and hear the quiet yes that's been waiting inside you all along. The Gemini who arises now is not a different version. It is the original one, the one who never needed to be edited in the first place. Gate 4, the courage to disappoint, breaking the spell of emotional perfectionism. Gemini, now that your inner voice has begun to awaken, there's a sacred challenge waiting for you on the horizon, one that may feel contradictory to everything you believed. The necessity of disappointment. Yes, disappointment. Not as failure, but as freedom. For decades, you've been crafting a version of yourself that others could applaud, rely on, lean into. You've been the bridge, the peacemaker, the one who never lets anyone down. But somewhere along the way, you began letting yourself down. You postponed your needs. You filtered your truth. You shaped your desires to avoid ruffling feathers. All in the name of being good, being kind, being accepted. But Gemini, real kindness includes yourself. Real goodness includes honesty. And real acceptance must begin at home. To honor your truth, you must now learn something radical. How to let people down. Let that sink in. You must learn how to say the words that make someone uncomfortable without rushing in to fix it. You must learn how to say no without over-explaining. How to step back when your soul is drained. How to let someone feel their disappointment without abandoning your own boundary just to suit theirs. This is not cruelty. It's maturity. People often mistake Geminis for being carefree, easygoing, emotionally detached. But we both know the truth. Underneath your lightness is a heart that aches to be understood. You've learned to keep the peace at all costs, not because you don't feel, but because you feel too much. Every ripple of tension registers in your nervous system. Every disappointed look, every sigh, every silence hits you like a storm. And so, early on, you became an expert at conflict avoidance. You made it your mission to prevent others from feeling uncomfortable, especially when that discomfort was directed at you. The child in you believed, if I'm the cause of someone's sadness, I'll lose their love. So you contorted yourself into harmony, even when it hurt. But here's the truth the stars are asking you to remember. Real love can survive disappointment. Let me tell you about Amina, a Gemini mother of 2 who came to me shattered by guilt. She had spent years bending to the needs of her family, never resting, never saying no, always available. They see me as their rock, she told me, but I feel like sand inside. One day, her youngest child asked why she never smiled anymore. That question pierced her like lightning, not because she was angry, but because she realized she hadn't made space for herself in years. That week, she did something revolutionary. She told her family she was unavailable every Sunday afternoon. No explanations, no apologies, just a boundary. At first, they resisted. Her husband grumbled. Her children protested. And for a moment, Amina felt the old shame rising. I'm being selfish. But she held her ground. And slowly, something shifted. Her children began to respect her space. Her husband started helping more. And Amina, she began writing again, painting again, smiling again. That's a paradox of emotional truth, Gemini. When you honor it, it feels like rupture at first. But what follows is renewal. Not everyone will like the new you. That's part of the deal. When you stop being the person who never says no, you will lose people who only loved your compliance. But you will gain the ones who love your truth. You will attract relationships where you can bring your entire self, flawed, radiant, complex, and still be loved. Disappointment is not the end of love. It is the test of it. Gemini, you must now face the illusion of emotional perfectionism. The belief that if you just say the right thing, do the right thing, adapt in the right way, everyone will stay happy and you will stay safe. But that's not safety. That's captivity. That's performing a role instead of living a life. So this week, let yourself be real. Say, I'm not available today, and don't feel the silence that follows. Say, that doesn't work for me, and resist the urge to soften it with a nervous laugh. Say, I don't agree, and stay in the conversation. Even if the other person is disappointed, even if they're upset, even if they pull away. Why? Because your integrity matters more than temporary approval. Your energy is sacred, Gemini, and when you pour it endlessly into keeping others comfortable, you empty yourself. But when you begin to disappoint others with grace, something miraculous happens. You begin to trust yourself again. You begin to feel safe inside your own skin. You begin to realize that the world does not end when someone is upset with you, and your worth is not diminished by someone else's disapproval. Here's what I want you to repeat this week like a mantra. It's okay if they're disappointed. It's not okay if I abandon myself. You have spent years trying to avoid rejection. But Gemini, the deepest rejection is the one we do to ourselves when we silence our needs to earn love. That's the cycle you're breaking now. Not with a scream, but with a sentence. Not with a fight, but with a boundary. Not with a collapse, but with a conscious choice to choose you. In Gate 4, we see the old system clearly. We see the strings of guilt, fear, and over-explaining that have kept you small. And with clarity comes choice. You can now say, "Thank you, but I'm not doing that anymore." You can let someone frown without rushing to make them smile. You can disappoint without dissolving into shame. This is power, not the kind that dominates, but the kind that liberates. And as you grow in this power, Gemini, you'll notice something stunning. People begin to mirror your authenticity. Conversations will become deeper. Relationships will become realer. Your energy will begin to return. And that ache, the one that lived behind your eyes for years, will soften. Because you are no longer trying to be everyone's everything. You are finally being yourself. Gate 5, the alchemy of integration. Reclaiming wholeness and writing your own script. Gemini, you've walked through memory and shadow. You've faced a moment your light dimmed, the addiction to approval, the reclaiming of your voice, and the terrifying yet sacred courage to disappoint others in service of your truth. Now the air changes. Something ancient and powerful begins to stir from within. The alchemy of integration. Integration isn't about fixing the past. It's about weaving it into the story of who you are today without shame. It's about reclaiming all the parts you once thought you had to leave behind to be loved. It's the moment when the child you were and the adult you become finally sit together in peace, not in performance. You are no longer at war with your history. You are no longer a character in a play written by old survival scripts. Now you become the author. Let's pause here, Gemini. Take a deep breath. Feel that? That space. The space you created by shedding layer after layer of false identity. The mental chatter is quieted. The guilt is losing its grip. In its place is something quieter, sturdier, and real, your essence. This is what true wholeness feels like. It's not about being perfect. It's about being congruent. Inside matches outside. What you feel matches what you say. What you need matches what you pursue. You are no longer split into fragments for the sake of pleasing others. You are one. This integration will not always feel dramatic. In fact, it may feel like a deep exhale, like the first moment you wake up and no longer feel the need to check how others are feeling before deciding how you feel. Like the moment you say no and don't spend hours rehearsing your reasons. Like when you smile not because someone expects it, but because it naturally rises. Gemini, you are an air sign, ruled by Mercury, the messenger, the communicator, the bridge between dualities. You have long danced between opposites, light and shadow, thought and feeling, silence and speech. But this week, the stars are helping you merge those halves, not to erase contrast, but to unify them in a deeper wholeness. You no longer need to choose between your intellect and your emotion, between solitude and connection, between being kind and being honest. You are both and more. One of my clients, Leanne, a Gemini in her early 50s, once said after a breakthrough, "I always thought I had to choose, be the bright, charming version of me or the introverted, contemplative one. But now I realize it's the same woman, just showing up in different rooms." That was her moment of integration. No longer compartmentalizing. No longer filtering herself to fit the expectations of others. And since that day, she's described her life as astonishingly quiet and profoundly alive. You may notice similar shifts now, Gemini. You may find yourself no longer over-explaining. You may walk away from situations that drain you without guilt. You may feel no need to defend your boundaries, only to stand in them. You'll realize that your worth has nothing to do with being useful, charming, or easy to digest. It simply is. And here's the most powerful part. The very traits that once felt like burdens, the overthinking, the emotional sensitivity, the adaptability, are now returning to you as gifts. Why? Because they are no longer driven by fear. You are no longer using them to survive. You are now choosing to use them consciously, rooted in your authenticity. Your adaptability becomes creative flow. Your overthinking becomes profound insight. Your emotional awareness becomes relational wisdom. This is alchemy in its truest form, turning wounds into wisdom, masks into mirrors, and survival skills into soul gifts. You're no longer pretending to be whole. You are whole. And from this place, something miraculous happens. You begin to rewrite your script, not the one handed down by wounded ancestors, not the one shaped by outdated beliefs, not the one written in the language of guilt, fear, and pleasing, but a new one born of clarity and compassion. It begins with simple, powerful questions. What does my joy look like? What do I need to feel truly safe, truly free? What does success mean to me, not society, not family? What would I create if I were no longer afraid? Let yourself write that script, Gemini, line by line, scene by scene, not from pressure, but from possibility. This is your life returning to you. And yes, there will still be moments when the old patterns call you back, when the urge to perform whispers again, when guilt knocks at your door. That's okay. You're not meant to erase your past. You're meant to walk with it, wiser now. When those moments come, speak gently to yourself. I remember why I used to do that, but I choose differently now. That's how healing becomes embodied. That's how transformation becomes permanent. And so, dear Gemini, you have crossed the fifth gate. You have turned toward the truth, faced it with trembling hands, held the inner child who once hid in silence, and chosen not just healing, but integration. Now, the world will begin to feel different, not because it has changed, but because you have. You're no longer looking for permission. You're no longer living for applause. You're no longer chasing love outside of yourself. You are love. You are your own witness. You are your own home. The Gemini that now rises from the ashes of old performance is someone the world desperately needs. Curious, expressive, sensitive, but also grounded, whole, and unapologetically real. Your story no longer belongs to your past. It belongs to your future. And you, Gemini, are the storyteller now. Conclusion, the homecoming. Living as a Gemini you were always meant to be. Gemini, if you followed this far, I want to pause and honor the journey you've just taken. This wasn't a casual reflection. This was a soul retrieval, a return to the self that had been waiting patiently, quietly, beneath layers of adaptation, approval-seeking, and emotional camouflage. This week marks the turning point, the kind that doesn't shout, but forever shifts the ground beneath your feet. You've seen where your people-pleasing began. You've traced the roots of the silence you once called safety. You've met the voice you silenced and invited it to speak again. You felt the terror of disappointing others and chosen to stay true to yourself anyway. And finally, you've begun writing a new script, one that is utterly your own. You're not the same person you were when you began watching this. Not because you've added something, but because you've shed what was never truly you. This is the real essence of Gemini, not duality as fragmentation, but duality as integration, not masking to fit in, but flow the full spectrum of your being. Playful and profound, light-hearted and wise, tender and unwavering. You are no longer an echo of others' desires. You are your own frequency now. And the beauty of this frequency, it calls on the people, the places, the possibilities that match your truth, not your performance. There will still be days when the old habits try to reclaim you, when guilt whispers, when fear knocks, but you'll meet them differently now, with awareness, with compassion, with choice. So I invite you to reflect. What part of your truth are you ready to live more fully, starting today? What part of your voice are you ready to let rise again? And if your inner child could speak in this moment, what would they finally say? If this message stirred something deep within you, share it. Let others know they're not alone. Comment below what this awakened in you. Your story might just be the mirror someone else needs to begin their own return. You are home now, Gemini. And this time, you're not leaving yourself behind.